was the authority of the Son. Does anybody remember what was last week's lesson? Or was all about? It was the paralytic man at the Bethesda pool. And this guy was basically there for about 30 years, paralyzed. And the thing with this Bethesda pool is that people believe that if the water stirred up, they believe that an angel stirred it up, and when they went into the pool first, they would be healed. And nobody would get this guy into the pool. I mean, do you think this guy had friends that would put this guy in the pool? Or do you think he didn't have any friends?
No friends.
No friends, I usually
Well, at first I think this guy had friends who were there to support him, but
After years, yeah.
yeah, after years, and they had commitments of their own, maybe families that they had to take care of.
So they just drifted.
Yeah, and and here comes this man named Jesus, who out of the blue just came over there and asked this paralytic guy if he wanted to be healed. And he gave the answer of, nobody's helping me get in the pool when it stirs up. And he had a choice, at that point, whoever believed Jesus or not. And he had nothing to lose. He's been there for like 30 years. So he might as well at least try to get up when Jesus commanded him to get up, right? He had nothing to lose at this point. So, in this story, we see that Jesus does care for us and wants us to be healed.
So I'd like to say something else. That man, that guy who was in that place for 38 years, he was focused to reach the place with the water, to reach the pool. And when Jesus saw him, he didn't ask him, do you want that I take you to the pool? Into the water? No, the question of Jesus was, do you want to be saved, to be healed? That's the most important. Sometimes we are focused in the solution that we do believe that it's the only solution. But Jesus and God give us another solution. And when we accept the solution that God offers us, I believe that we will achieve a good result.
And that's a good point, because we have our own wisdom. Oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. Keyword, I think I need to do something. But Jesus knows what we need, and he will provide for our needs. Alright? He knows what we really need. And it's that same by one paraphrasing. Let us not work off on our own wisdom, but God's wisdom. Our wisdom is imperfect. So I think that'll be good enough for the introduction, right?
Yes.
Alright.
Incoming voice call from Danny Stevens.
Thank you, Brother Anna.
Incoming voice call from Danny Stevens.
I'll read the memory verse. It says, "But Jesus said unto them, They need not depart. Give ye them to eat." Matthew chapter 14, verse 16.
Yes.
The opening note reads, "Often we hesitate, unwilling to give all that we have, fearing to spend and to be spent for others. But Jesus has bidden us, Give ye them to eat. His command is a promise, and behind it is the same power that fed the multitude beside the sea." Okay, with that, we'll move on to Sunday, One Hungering Souls. So here we're talking about who else accompanied Jesus and the disciples.
Well, so we read
Oh, my
after
sister's here.
after fasting, Jesus went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. As we saw a multitude, who believed in him because they saw the miracles of Jesus.
Okay, so we're on Sunday, A. We'll just ask the first question. And so who else accompanied was a great multitude, like Brother Ando mentioned. And we're in the Galilee region, right, which is north of Judea. And then the note mentioned that at this time the Passover was at hand. And so obviously, because why do we have so many people, right? They're pilgrims that are on their way to Jerusalem. They're traveling, gathered to see Jesus. And so here, although we don't have the exact number of the multitude, it says assembled 5,000 men besides women and children. So we know that it's more than 5,000 people. So moving on to B, we're going to talk about the spiritual condition of the people that is found here in Mark chapter 6, verse 34.
And Jesus, when he came out, saw much people, and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So basically, the people were lost and needed guidance.
Which later will have a parallel to Psalms chapter 23, my favorite chapter in the Bible. But yeah, so they were like sheep without a shepherd. So Jesus knew that without a shepherd, the sheep would be in a lot of trouble, right? Because again, we from history and from the condition of the Pharisees, they weren't going to get it from them because they themselves are not understanding the scriptures as they should, because they're not taking care of the people and their
You know, the
needs, right?
Pharisees, they kind of only cared like about money and people paying them, but if they saw like poor people, they're like, it's not.
Yeah, they differentiated between people, and God, that's not something biblical. Yes, Brother Adam, you have.
And also they cared about, you should be following this rule, that rule, that
Yeah.
rule.
Oh yeah, the legalities.
Yeah, they care about legalism.
So, since Jesus was worried about his sheep, he decided, to lend a hand. So, since they can't fend for themselves, right, and this would cause more problems, right, if they were to listen to false doctrines, right? So then Jesus had to intercede, right? So Jesus was moved with compassion, as we are called to have compassion for others, for the people among the crowd, because he knew their pressing demands were prompted by great needs, right? So he was to feed them, and that was to feed them with the word of God, which obviously we'll talk about later on, the loaves and the fish. So that concludes Sunday. So moving on to Monday, caring.
Something else.
Just kidding.
Just said an important word is that's pilgrims, right? Jesus was planning everything, even he could plan another thing or another miracle that we are going to see, but he decided to do this miracle because he knew that many pilgrims were going to be there as well. And so in every miracle, in every important event that
first miracle, right, with turning barrels of turning them into wine, right? It was during a wedding,
Right.
so a lot of people, a big opportunity for him. Okay, moving. Well, before, is there any comments, person?
No, I
Or
was gonna
move
say
on.
with the next one, cause this is
Okay,
literally the
okay.
lesson I did with the kids last week, so I'm like, okay, I know this.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
we were
okay.
talking about the little boy.
Okay, moving on to Monday, to caring for our needs. So question A says, what did Jesus tenderly recognize that the people needed, and how did he use this opportunity to test the faith of his disciple Philip? Yes, Brother Adam.
I was going to read John 6, 3 through 6.
Thank you.
And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. When Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread, that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do.
Thank you, Brother Adam. So my question before I comment, why did he choose to call upon Philip?
I think maybe Philip like doubted a bit. He's like, when we read the another verse, it said that not even like 200 penny, or let's say like not even $200 would be enough to feed all these people. He's like, it's impossible. He was already putting in his mind, this can't be done.
Because he's
then-
thinking through man's efforts, right?
Just imagine if it said there was like 5,000 men, that doesn't include the
That is
women and children. There's easily like 10,000. I can't even picture.
I was
How
almost
much
gonna say
people?
15 though.
It could
Because
be from
10
10
men,
to 15, yeah. There's usually more children.
sorry, 5,000 men and then 5,000 women and then 5,000 children. But obviously that's just what I'm saying. It's obviously we know it's just more than 5,000.
Yeah, it could be easily a few.
Yes, brother.
Like I said earlier, we often rely on our wisdom instead of God's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And also for the fact that Jesus did recognize what these people needed. There's a difference between needs and wants.
Mm-hmm.
In
He covers
everything.
our needs, not our wants.
Yes, like Jesus cares about every aspects of our lives. Even like financial, housing. We need houses. We don't need a big mansion or whatever. We just need a place to live. If we need clothing. We don't need the most expensive clothing out there. We do need money for cover our bills, but we don't need like billions and trillions of dollars.
So at this moment, it was time for Philip to grow, right? Because we've had many examples of Peter, right? Andrew's brother. And later on, we'll actually get to see Andrew as well. So to continue, one of the reasons, huh?
We're gonna read the note?
No, not yet. One of the reasons he might have called upon Philip was because the place in which this miracle is going to take place is basically the home of Philip, right? So because he's asking him what question? What was the question he's asking him?
The question to Philip.
Yeah, it's Philip. Whence shall we buy bread
Like,
that they may
Yeah.
eat?
So he's
right?
asking him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jesus is
Like,
asking
you're from here.
Philip, right? Because they're from Bethsaida, right? The same as Andrew and Peter. But right now it's time for Philip to
Yeah.
grow.
There's something interesting here because the question should be from Philip to Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that Jesus and God promise give us everything. But as we are reading, it was to prove him
Mm-hmm.
because Jesus wanted to see what would be the answer and the reaction from Philip.
What you're getting to be.
Yeah, and sometimes it looks like God asks something about, okay, what would you do? What do you have here? What are you doing here? Whatever. God knows the answer better than us, but we have to believe, we have to do something to be prepared to act in those cases.
Okay, thank you, Brother Arlo. So Jesus knew what miracle he was about to perform, but he wanted to give the opportunity to teach his disciples, right? Especially along the way. So for Jesus, this wasn't only about getting a job done, which we know it's feeding the multitude, but also about teaching his disciples, especially at this time it was for Philip. So the dilemma here first is that they didn't have the resources to buy bread and feed the multitude, and second, even if they had the money, it would be impossible to purchase enough to feed everyone and to satisfy everyone. So that was the dilemma. So now we're going to see on B, Philip's reaction, which is John chapter 6, verse 7. If anyone would like to read.
It says, Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little.
Thank you, Sister. Sister Brooks. All right, so Philip's knowledge of the situation, as Sister Brooks mentioned, was accurate and impressive. He said, we don't have 200 denarii. And at that time, for the working man to be able to accumulate such money, it would take 6 months, right? So it's a really long time, and obviously they didn't have this. But his knowledge was useless in getting the problem solved. And it's important for us, right? What is our Christian lesson here is that we often limit God, right? Because we're seeing it through our own efforts, right? But remember, our God is big and he can make, if he made the universe, there's nothing that he can't do. So we have to, always be open to the possibility of God. So another question is, what can we learn from Philip's steps and approach? So here, Philip was apparently a matter-of-fact person, so a quick reckoner and a good man of business, right? And so therefore more ready to rely on his own calculations than on unseen resources. So here we're seeing from his reaction how we can see where his state is, right? And so because Jesus wants him to grow, he wants him to not be looking at his own efforts, his own calculations. He wants to be open to the opportunity of what God is going to do, right? Due to, he's going to call upon what they have and then multiply that, just like the same thing with us. We have our talents, and as we try to cultivate that, we'll be able to bless others the way God intends for the situations. Any questions for Monday B?
From Monday.
Well, just I remember when I was reading with the kid, it said that before this happened, he had been tired from the previous day that they went into the sea to get some, to rest and have some peace and quiet. And even then, people were still kind of calling him in both. And then when he saw the great multitude, he was like, okay, it's time for us to go. So I felt he was still just tired. The disciples themselves were hungry. They hadn't eaten the whole day. There was, women there, there's kids. All these people, I cannot send these people away hungry. I need to feed them. And then obviously he'll use this opportunity to show probably one of his biggest miracles, multiplying this food.
And also he was only focused in the resources that they have. That they have that money, they have that quantity. But they were forgetting that they were with Jesus. They were used to the miracles, but in that moment they forgot that Jesus could help them with something else to much money did they spend for that miracle?
Nothing.
Nothing. They didn't.
Okay, Tuesday, 3, whatever was available. So now, for question A, we're gonna have Andrew's help, and for this we have John chapter 6, verse 8 to 10. Who would like to read?
One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, says unto him, There's a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000.
Thank you. So here again, Andrew once again introduces someone to Jesus. First, it was his brother Peter. That was back in John chapter 1, verses 40 to 42. Now it was a lad with some barley. So 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And it's interesting here because barley, especially back then, was considered a simple food, which implies that this young boy probably came from a poor family. But remember, God feeds us with the bread of life, okay? So remember, God doesn't need any help, but he often deliberately restrains, right? God steps back until he has our participation. Okay, so Jesus asked them, so the order that Jesus calls is for them to sit down upon the grass, which that's when I'm talking about going to Psalms chapter 23, especially verses 1 and 2, where it says, he makes me to lie down in green pastures, and then to continue on in the following verses, he prepares a table for me. Sorry, I just really love that chapter. So here, just that demonstration, right? That he, what's taking place, and then also, since God is a God of order, he's ordering the disciples to make sure that they're in groups of 50 or 100, right? Because in everything there has to be order. So so Andrew called over the young boy, and this is what is available to them, okay? And then Jesus calls everyone to sit down in obedience, right? So all of these steps are important, and we're going to continue on that stream of thought for B. So it says, explain the steps Christ took in multiplying the food and what lessons we can learn from this. So here we have 3 different books. So here, they're all the same. They're commanded to sit. Jesus prays for the meal, right? He gives thanks to the Father. He insists on doing this miracle, so once he's finished with the miracle, then he calls the disciples to distribute. And then I think that's about it for all 3 chapters.
Well, basically, Jesus just took the food, he looked up to heaven, he blessed it, he broke it, and then he gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the people.
They distribute.
Yeah, that's how you found 4 things or 4 steps that you said. First one is praise, then bless, then break, and after gave the loaves to everyone.
Thank you. So I did a deep dive, because every single time we read chapters that you've already previously read, you always are able to find a different angle. And so mine was that bread comes from a grain, right? Which has the power of multiplication and reproduction within itself, right? Like any seed, that's just what they do. You plant it and then it grows, right?
You save seeds and you plant it again for like ever.
But when you're making bread, the grain is crushed, making it dead, correct?
Right.
So no one has ever multiplied wheat by planting
Like
flour, right? We're all on the same page with that? We can't Yet Jesus can bring life from death. He multiplied the loaves of bread, and also bread made from dead crushed grain and from dead fish. He also multiplied the fish, right? But they're dead, so they can't, reproduce, right? So, so this is an interesting way in which I was like, where I got to see a different side of especially these three scriptures. And so I also wanted to mention too, although it's a bit different, if we recall, when Jesus was tempted, right after his baptism, right, and Satan tells him to turn the rock into bread. Obviously, he was never going to give Satan the upper hand, right? This was a temptation. He made a decision. Even though he was physically hungry, he did not give in, right? But now, because of he's seeing the needs, right? Because he has compassion over the multitude, and he's seeing that they need food, right? Because they've listened to him speak for who knows how many hours, right? It's been a while. They're hungry. They're pilgrims, so they've been traveling. They're weary. They're tired, and this is just the natural tendency that we need to physically eat. So here he decides to do this miracle for them to be able to not just satisfy their physical needs, but also their spiritual needs, because obviously everything has a figurative and literal application. And so, and the thing is, when he multiplied the loaves and the fish, it says that the multitude ate until they were satisfied. Okay, because God will always satisfy us. And if I could have someone read the last paragraph of the note.
On C or B?
B.
Also something else.
Or before.
The plan of Christ, the plan of God. God doesn't work alone. Jesus doesn't work alone.
The Trinity.
Jesus or God can be the work alone, but they include us in their job, because they want to us be in the same house, in the same company. For example, when we read the first verse in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, it says that God gave to Jesus one revelation. Jesus sent it to with the angel to the apostle. So we found here four members in that work. In this case, is the same. In the second paragraph, he says, "In this miracle, Christ received from the Father. He imparted to the disciples to the people, and the people to one another. So all who are united to Christ will receive from him the bread of life, and impart it to others. His disciples are the appointed means of communication between Christ and the people." Okay, that's the same.
Thank you, Brother Arlo. So especially, like it was mentioned, he deliberately chose the disciples to distribute. Also, because once, since Jesus knows that his time is limited, unlike the disciples, right, they're thinking that they're always going to be possibly with Jesus, but they also had to take part in this because obviously later on Jesus was going to send them their own ways. They wouldn't be together. They would have to go, send Philip, to the north and the other one to the west, and they were going to be given different directions. So they needed to be, they needed to take part for them to be able to move on to the next step. For them to, in the preparation that Jesus was trying to get all of them. But also there's also this time, especially when you're eating, is a great time to get well acquainted with other people. Because I'm pretty sure, at least in my mind, I think that some of the people, because you're talking about a lot of people that maybe in the future they would have, have been like, oh wait, that's Philip. I know Philip. He's the one who, distributed the loaves and the fish. to me and my family, I'm thinking that there might have been a picture like that, that they were able to have shared, in their life. But that's just, my thinking. But yes, this was a necessity for them to get them ready for the preparation of when they had to, unfortunately, be separated from Jesus. Okay, moving on to C. Of what lessons on true ministry are we reminded here? So we have Isaiah chapter 61, verse 6.
For all of you shall be named the priests of the Lord. Men shall call you the ministers of our God. And all of you shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall